Planck Center over many years now. Bill Heyman has been one of the most important supporters and sponsors of our work. He is always a thought leader in this area, and it was with Bruce that Bill joined, as well as along with IBM, to provide the support for this event. So I know how much it means to him that we're doing this work as well as providing this thought leadership. I am thrilled to be here with this panel. I want to introduce them to you, and the way we're set up here for this afternoon will be, we've asked each of the 5 people that you have in front of you to join me here or to stand on, make their presentations over about 10 minutes to talk about the implications as well as next steps and suggestions they may have on how we as academic leaders and professionals in the community can take advantage of these great learnings, which will only build over time. Joining on the professional practice front is Dr. Frank OVAITT, who you know is President and CEO of the Institute for Public Relations. On the leadership development front, Roger Bolton, President of the Arthur W. Page Society. For teaching and education, Dr. Kathy FITZPATRICK with QUINNIPIAC University. And by the way, I said to Kathy a little earlier that along with Liz Toth, who will honor tonight at dinner, seemed like an SMU connection. That was my school, and so we have those roots together, which I'm very pleased. On company development programs, Gary SHEFFER, who is the Vice President of Corporate Communications and Public Affairs at GE. And then finally on the research and theory front, Dr. Linda Hahn from the University of Florida, and one of our longtime trustees as well with us on the Planck Center, which we're thrilled to have her with us today. So let's start with Frank on the professional practice front. Please join me in welcoming Frank OVAITT.
Thank you, Keith. I want to say, first of all, this clearly is a great piece of research. And whatever questions that people may have about it, nevertheless, there's no question that it helps us see as leaders, helps us see as a profession, helps us see as organizations supporting the profession where it is we need to focus. Now, I do want to put one however on there, which is for people who are supposed to be good at seeing around corners, i.e. public relations and communications people, I'm always astonished anytime you do research that says, what do we need to do to prepare for the future? You get back an awful lot of the hottest issues today that we're dealing with. So, and I think that this sidestepped that in part by the depth and the wisdom of the factors and the issues that it was asking about. And nevertheless, I do think it's a very important thing for us to consider, and this may be a factor in future research, and it may just be a factor in how we ourselves think about things. But I do think we really need to give more attention to, well, how do we really see around corners for our own profession and what's going on today that's going to change that, and what are the things we need to be ready for next. Point number 2. In the previous panel, one of the top 10 headlines was that the digital revolution is transforming practice and leaders worldwide. I believe that's absolutely true. And in fact, I think digital and social media really has a deeper meaning in terms of the change that it's creating today, deeper than we sometimes give it credit for. And frankly, I found this to be visible in the results both from the senior respondents and the more junior respondents. To give you an idea what I mean, about a month ago, just outside London, 30 minutes and 300 years west of Heathrow, the Institute had an event that we call the European Professional Colloquium. Merrill McDonald was there, Bill Heyman was there, but he's not here right now. But this was the very top communicators of companies like ABB were there. The International Olympic Committee, their head of communications was there. Royal Bank of Scotland, Tetra Pak, which is a giant Turkish company primarily in the packaging business. The World Economic Forum, their head of communications was there. So this is really a blue ribbon top-level group. And the theme that we focused on, and it evolved over time. Originally, it was going to be a very senior look at social media and what that means. And eventually that evolved to reputation in a social environment. And they chose that very carefully because the subtext was the give and take is here to stay. I think that's the real meaning of the digital and social revolution in public relations. The give and take is here to stay. Now, I don't pretend to know whether it's social media that has caused us to see this, or whether it was in fact we have a whole society that was ready for that much was anticipating a greater give and take with the organizations with whom they do business, with whom they deal with on a governmental level. But nevertheless, I think the real meaning of social media today is that the give and take is here to stay. And guess what? That's got a lot to do with listening skills. That's got a lot to do with seeing around corners. But I think that's a very important, to me at least, underlining meaning for the practice of this piece of research. Third, I kept asking myself why measurement didn't come out higher on these lists. It's there. It's there with a reasonable level. But it does seem to me that it's quite possible that several things were happening. One is that measurement relates to all of the above in terms of the factors that were rated higher, and also measurement relates to all of the below in terms of measurements of factors that were related lower. But in any case, there may be a difference between those who feel the pain of needing to prove the value of what we do, and those who feel the pain of, by the way, if I'm measured, I may be held accountable for that. But I have to tell you that however it came out as an issue on this, I talked to a lot of practitioners, senior, junior, client, agency, and I am more convinced than ever. Most recently, just last week, we had Jack Martin, the global CEO of Hill & Knowlton Strategies, and he was speaking at the University of Maryland, which I saw Elizabeth Toth here just a little bit earlier, but we put on this year's Grunig Lecture event, a series that now this is probably the 5th year of it. And Jack Martin just couldn't have been clearer of the importance of measurement and what that means to our future going forward. And the thing was, he was saying what any number of other people have said, you know, that really is something we have to get our hands around that. We have to get our hands around standards for measurement in our field so that we're not all making it up as we go. But I would tell you that, again, I think it's scored decently on this. I will tell you from my own experience and what I hear from people, I personally think it's time to double down on measurement and evaluation. We've got to get that done. We've got to have standards for that. We have to get it done right. Fourth, and my last observation, do leaders, in fact, drink too much of their own Kool-Aid in terms of how good they are at leading? I would argue that junior people who want the way cleared for them to move up will always think that the leadership there is not as excellent as it could be. And of course, current leaders who face all kinds of pressures that the people at lower level don't face yet think that they're doing a more excellent job than not. And after all, they're responsible not only to the people reporting to them who were involved in this survey, they're also responsible for the people to whom they report, for our stakeholders broadly. You know, all of those people who think they want a relationship with this business, somehow I'm responsible for that. That said, my question is, what if both are right? If you're the leader and you know the pressures you face and you know why you think it's excellent or not, but you've got other constituents, most particularly in this case the people reporting to you, who think you are less than excellent, and we saw those numbers. It was a Grand Canyon divide. Well, what does it mean if both of you are right, both parties are right, and how do you do your job differently the next day? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the next one.
You heard in the opening comments remarks that were made about John Iwata, and Roger Bolton has, in his work in leading the Arthur Page Society, been at the forefront of work around not only that authentic enterprise that John was a part of with so many others who are here, but also the most recent work, and it's my pleasure on the leadership development front to introduce Roger.
Thanks, Keith. Thank you. I just have to begin by saying something about Betsy Plank, and just taking a second to think about the incredible lifetime of leadership and mentorship that she led, and the incredible legacy that she's left behind with this Plank Center. And I just want to also mention that Betsy was the first recipient of the Arthur W. Page Society Distinguished Service Award, which recognizes people who dedicate their lives to leadership in the profession, and that Ron Culp is also a recipient of the Distinguished Service Award from the Arthur W. Page Society. And so is Bruce Harrison, who was here earlier, but I don't know if Bruce is still in the room, but Bruce was here earlier. And I would also just mention, as long as we're on awards, that 3 of your honorees this evening are in the Arthur W. Page Society Hall of Fame: Marjorie Krause, Steve Harris, and John Iwata, who I believe will be here later. I am pleased to be here to represent the Page Society. John mentioned the Page Society and the potential for more cooperation between Plank and Page, Bruce, and I would just like to follow up on that formally right here and see if we've sort of talked about this before, but if we could maybe spend a little time and include Frank in the conversation, maybe we could do some things together. Because the mission of the Page Society is to advance the leadership role of the Chief Communications Officer. And the Plank Center, of course, is the Center for Leadership in Public Relations. So in a sense, we're about the same thing. The thought leadership work that the Page Society has been doing for the past few years, from Authentic Enterprise to the Trust Report and to the new model, which has been mentioned a number of times today, including by John in his opening remarks, and Rob's got a great graphic of it on the very left-hand side of that incredible mural that he's back there laboring on. So if anyone's not familiar with the new model, just look in the left-hand corner over there and you'll see the new model. But during the course of that thought leadership work, we've been seeking to advance a point of view on the criticality of the role of the Chief Communications Officer to the success of the enterprise. And we believe that as the world has gotten more complicated and we've entered into this area of radical transparency fueled by the digital revolution, that in fact that is the case. However, it's the case that the CCO is becoming increasingly important to the success of the enterprise. However, I don't think that that success is guaranteed. And in order to guarantee that success, several things have to happen. Well, what do you mean it's not guaranteed? Well, for one thing, I think we're observing that marketing and communications are being pushed closer together, and that's largely a good thing. And when you see at IBM that the CCO is now the CCO and the CMO and is leading strategy for the company, that's a very, very good thing. And when you see at GE that the CCO becomes the CMO and the CCO and the CMO are working together like that, that's a very good thing. And you see similar things at Xerox and other places. But in other companies, you see CCOs becoming subservient to a marketing-oriented CMO, or you see a CEO turning, apparently in some desperation, to somebody else who he or she thinks understands the business better than the CCO and the CMO, and putting a business leader in charge who doesn't bring either the marketing or the broader stakeholder view that the CCO brings. So I don't think it's guaranteed that as the ability to protect and build brand and reputation and build corporate character become more important to organizations, that the CCO inevitably leads. So what will be necessary for the CCO to be able to step up? Well, the first thing is to know what to do. And how can the CCO in fact help the enterprise succeed? And that's what the new model is designed to say. And as John explained briefly, and Bruce has referenced it several times, it starts with corporate character. And the CCO has an opportunity, in fact an obligation, to lead across the enterprise as corporate character is developed, identified, and activated. The second thing, the second part of the new model is how to, once you become an enterprise with a strong corporate character, and by that we mean mission, purpose, values, culture, aligned with brand, business model, strategy, etc., to become the distinguishing, unique distinguishing characteristic of that enterprise. How do you then go and build deep, meaningful, and lasting relationships with stakeholders? And that starts, as John said this morning, in a very different way of thinking about the role. It starts with building shared belief, leading to action, leading to confidence in those actions, to leading to advocacy at scale. So that's what the CCO needs to do. But the second thing is that the CCO is going to have to be able to answer the call and be able to deliver on those things. And it's a very different way of thinking and requiring a totally different set of skills. And so when I was looking at the results of the study, I was thinking, what's in this that helps to reveal for us what are the things that the CCO will need to be able to be good at? And I think there's a lot here, actually. The 7 dimensions of PR leadership, that model that's in here, very interesting. A lot of things about self-insights, which Bruce mentioned, and ethical orientation. The soft skills, which again, Bruce made a good point of. And thirdly, and this is kind of the leading finding, the skills related to dealing with the speed and volume of information. How do we understand this world? What's important out of all this? And skills related to the digital revolution, which I think, as I've understood the study, means how to use social media. And I think the realization that we can deliver, we can transform also. We can use the same opportunities and skills, the same social media. So when I think about those things from the study against the new model, there are several things that I think stand out. The first thing the CCO needs to do in order to implement the new model is to lead strategically across the enterprise. It's not something that is in the control of the CCO or the CEO or even the senior management team. It's the entire enterprise has to be aligned behind a corporate character and learn how to activate authentic advocacy across the entire enterprise. That requires leadership across the organization. And if you look at that model of the seven skills, think strategically, have emotional intelligence, team collaboration, understand the organizational culture and structure, relationship building. It's almost a roadmap to strategic leadership across the organization. The second thing that the CCO is going to need to be able to do in this emerging new world is become an expert at behavioral science. It's easy to say build shared belief and get people to act. It's less easy to understand what does make people believe. Well, it's evidence, it's people I trust, it's personal experiences. Well, how do you help people achieve those things? It's not just messaging. It's not just effectively delivering messaging. It's understanding behavioral science. And if you look at the soft skills that are mentioned in this study, you begin to see some keys to some of the behavioral science techniques. The third thing that CCOs will need to do, and I'm actually just picking out several things from the back of the new model report where there's like 7 or 8 things. But the third thing is to understand big data. We are in a position to really understand a lot more about people than we ever have before. Not just segments, not just audiences, not just targets, but people as individuals. They are revealing a great deal about themselves, how they get information and when, what they care about, what they respect, who they respect, what they think. This is knowable information. And yet, how many of us in this profession are really adept at understanding and building the skills to be able to translate that? So at the Page Society, through our thought leadership work, what we've been trying to do is figure out what CCOs need to do to lead, what are the skills, and then the third thing is, now how do we get those skills? And so we've put together a series of programs. We have insight forums coming up next year on corporate character based on a study that Merrill McDonald and Helen Ostrowski are leading. We're going to have a forum that Ginger Hardage is putting together for us at Southwest Airlines in Dallas in March on corporate character. We've got a new study coming out on social media led by Bob Feldman and Alan Marks. We've got a insight forum on owned media, which GE is going to host in June in Chicago, here in Chicago. Gary, thank you. We're going to have an insight forum on big data at the Almaden Research Center of IBM in November, hosted by John Iwata. And we're doing a study on authentic advocacy. That's telling me I'm done. And I am done. Authentic advocacy new study from Matt Gonring and Dave Sampson. So it's all geared to how do we understand, how do we build those skills, and then how do we teach each other those skills. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. Keith, back to you.
Roger, thank you. If you know Betsy Plank as we knew her, she loved students and educators, and in particular on the education front, I would tell you that one of the programs we've created over the past few years is called Fellowship for Educators. There are educators in the room with us tonight. You're aware of this program. We place educators every year inside of corporations, associations, and other places where we can benefit from their knowledge and their insights in terms of students, the new generations of men and women who are coming up in the profession, and we in turn can have influence, I believe, on how they see our work and some of the very issues Roger just mentioned, as well as the information we've seen today in the research. I also want to, as I introduce her, thank Dr. Kathy Fitzpatrick, who joined us about a year and a half ago for one of the webinar series that we did, which we do on an ongoing basis as a part of our work. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Kathy Fitzpatrick for Teaching and Education.
Thank you, Keith. And thank you to Bruce and the research team and to Carla Gower and the Planck Center for inviting us all here this afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be here. As I listened to the presentations this afternoon, I too thought of how proud Betsy would be of the fine work that you're doing at the Planck Center and the important bridges you're building between industry and academe. 2 decades ago, one of our leading scholars, Bob Heath, wrote about the need for public relations research and pedagogy to keep pace with contemporary practice. The pragmatic test of current pedagogy, he said, is that many persons who carry the public relations title are not competing successfully for management level positions in their organizations. Well, since that time, we've made significant progress in integrating management concepts into the curriculum, particularly at the graduate level. These efforts continue, of course, but there is little debate among scholars and practitioners about the importance of management training to the success of future public relations professionals. The challenge we face today is a different one: leadership. If we apply Bob's test, that many persons who carry public relations in their titles are not competing successfully for leadership positions in their organizations, then we have more work to do. In moving forward, I think we should heed Bob's advice. As our discipline moves toward enhanced professionalism, he said, curriculum may follow. But, he continued, it is quite likely that curriculum needs to lead. The Global Leadership Study presented today gives us some valuable new insights into the need for such leadership as well on the part of academe, as well as some of the challenges that we face. In thinking about the importance of education, the importance or the implications of the study to education and training, the most striking findings to me were not those related to what some might see as the more substantive aspects of the study. Rather, they were related to demographics, specifically the perceptual gaps in how practitioners view leadership, both the gender gap and the generation gap. I actually came up with a name for this apparent phenomenon. I call it the grumpy old men syndrome. With respect to the gender gap, here's what the study tells us. Men are less optimistic about the future of public relations than women. Men rated the big issue challenges related to leadership as less important than women. Men view widely accepted leadership qualities as less important to their success than do women. Men view leadership training as less important than do women, yet they view themselves more often than do women as being leaders in the field. And they indicate a desire to serve in leadership positions more often than do women. These differences in how men and women perceive issues related to leadership suggest that for whatever reasons, men and women do indeed define leadership differently. In this respect, the results are in line with prior studies that have shown differences in how male and female practitioners view leadership. But this study provides us some additional important evidence that such differences influence practitioners' perceptions of both their roles in leadership and also the relative importance of various aspects of leadership, including development and training. The same appears true with regard to the generation gap. Here, the study indicates that more experienced, i.e. the older practitioners, see the world quite differently than their younger counterparts. Two findings stand out. One is that top-level leaders rank the speed and flow of information as significantly more important than do lower-level professionals. The second is that more experienced professionals say the big issues in the field are more important, perhaps more challenging, than do less experienced practitioners. These findings suggest to me that where older practitioners see a transformed environment, perhaps their younger counterparts simply see what to them is the now environment. In other words, we grumpy old men and women perceive the world through faded glasses. We remember the days when we had to walk financial news releases over to various media outlets to comply with the SEC disclosure requirements. And we compare that time to this time, characterized by a 24/7 news cycle and Twitter feeds. But young people don't see it quite that way. They simply see what is. Another example, the study refers to the new generation of practitioners as more reluctant leaders. I wonder, are they really more reluctant, or are they simply more comfortable perhaps with a different style of leading, which reflects their own style of leadership? In such case, then it may be that the traditional corner office simply is less attractive to our younger counterparts. For example, the study indicates that younger professionals want more two-way communication in their organization. And the youngest among them rated organizational culture, ethical orientation, work teams, and coalitions significantly higher than did their older counterparts. Is this simply a reflection of their position on the organizational ladder, or is there more at play here? For example, rather than rejecting leadership, are they simply saying we're in favor of a more collaborative style of leading? There were other perceptual gaps here as well, including the Grand Canyon size gaps in terms of how the younger and older practitioners view the performance of leaders. But perhaps more important than one particular finding is what the gender and generation gaps reveal overall. And that is that public relations professionals, men and women, young and old, view leadership differently. Clearly, we need to understand why these differences exist before we can fully understand the implications for education and training. For example, and potentially most important, are these differences, at least in part, the result of academic training? Notably, only 16.4% of the survey participants said they were trained in public relations or corporate strategic communications programs. Another 16.5% indicated communication, media studies, or advertising marketing as major study areas. Well, that means that 2/3 of these study participants had no academic training in public relations or communications. Clearly, the challenges we face with respect to the education of future public relations leaders extends beyond the classroom. For those who do choose public relations, however, as a course of study, I think we should begin to answer this important question. How can academic training help to shape public relations professionals' perceptions of leadership in public relations, as well as their perceptions of their roles in the organizations they represent? The point that Bob was making 20 years ago is that if we teach our students technical skills, then they will become technicians. If we teach them management skills, then they will become managers. So if we teach them leadership skills, they will become leaders. Of course, it's not quite that easy. First, we must define what we mean by leadership in public relations. And then we must determine how and where it fits within the public relations curriculum. Notably, the recent graduate report by the Commission on Public Relations Education, which was quite excellent if you haven't read it, took a step in this direction by highlighting the importance of well-developed leadership skills for today's practitioners. At the same time, the Commission included leadership training as part of strategic public relations management skills. I think it is worth asking whether leadership should be incorporated into the management aspects of the curriculum, or whether we should be thinking about curricular tiers that distinguish technical skills, management skills, and leadership skills. Such distinctions, of course, will be influenced to a great degree by how educators themselves define leadership in public relations. And on this point, an earlier study by Alina and Bruce found what they said was possible disagreement among the academic community on whether public relations practitioners should even strive to become members of the leadership teams of their organizations. Indeed, these researchers concluded that educators see and define leadership in somewhat different ways. The point here is that if educators don't agree on what leadership in public relations means, then how can we develop a common curriculum that reflects concepts and principles important to future leaders? This also raises the question of whether leadership in public relations is different than leadership in other fields. Although the survey participants were mixed in their response to this question, it doesn't really get at the point of how leadership is or should be defined. Here, I think the study provides some great insights into what could be a unique leadership role for public relations. For example, as a couple folks have already mentioned, there is considerable support here for the importance of soft skills, especially ethics and leadership. Such skills certainly would seem to position public relations professionals well for leadership roles, but we really haven't defined a leadership role for public relations around these qualifications, nor have practitioners embraced such a role. In fact, some of the research that has been conducted indicates broad disagreement among practitioners regarding their roles in organizational leadership. For example, one study asked whether public relations professionals should serve as the social conscience of the organizations they represent. Clearly, this is a role that requires the soft skills that the study addressed. And so, perhaps for that reason, some practitioners said, yes, absolutely, seeing this as a natural fit for their expertise and skills. But others didn't see it that way. They said they were not interested in, nor were they qualified for such roles. Such divergent views, of course, beg the question, what is the ideal leadership role for public relations? Going forward, that is the question I think academia can lead on.
Thank you, Kathy. Headline number 5. Soft skills and self-insights are the holy grail. It's an interesting headline. This summer I had an opportunity to spend about an hour with Gary SHEFFER, who's going to join us now to talk about the company development programs and how we frankly use these learnings and other learnings inside of corporations. And in the conversation Gary and I had, while we discussed, as many leaders do in best-in-class work, the role of strategy, the role of understanding the business, all the things that we know are important, Gary focuses well on what I believe are the soft skills, the important things that we do today: emotional intelligence, curiosity, having an inside-out perspective, doing things that our leaders look to us to do that we don't normally think about but are important for leading companies today. And it's with that that I want to introduce Gary Sheffer.
Thanks, Keith. I would just say, though, as a man, I'm not really sure all this leadership stuff's that important, but I do know that I am a great leader. So I just came from New York, and so I'm going to start, and I hope you think it's appropriate, by asking you something, which is to, if you can, make a donation to the American Red Cross or a charity of your choosing to help people after Hurricane Sandy. I would just say that I was talking to someone who was talking to our contact, GE's contact at the Red Cross, and they said they were having a tough time raising money for relief efforts simply because there's a perception, I think, that a lot of these are beach homes and people who can afford to pay for the recovery that needs to happen, and of course that's not the case if you live in places like Bridgeport, et cetera. So there's a lot of need there. And related to that, we talked a lot about generational sort of understanding of our profession and the millennials and me. I'll tell you a little story about a guy who works for me. He's French. He does PR. He just moved to this country, to Lower Manhattan, a week ago. And he finally got a cell phone last night, and cell line, and called me and said, Gary, my apartment building is flooded and someone just set it on fire. So is it okay if I don't come to work tomorrow? So that's the kind of commitment that you see among some of these young people. And by the way, just lastly, to end the comedy bit here, if anybody knows a good roofer, even in Chicago, I will personally fly them back with me to New York to work on my roof. So I wanted to frame all of this around development and some of the development programs that Keith and I talked about on the phone. You know, my CEO judges me largely on the quality of my team. In my annual performance review, it's about are the people that we're putting on the team, are they bigger players? Are they able to play at a level that's consistent with the other leaders of our businesses around the world? Can they be the trusted advisor that we all seek to be? And so when I do my annual performance review, it's not about the holding statements or the plans we put together, but it's about the quality of the people from business to business and across the function. And so I do think it all comes back to, as I read this report and this study, to the soft skills. And so I thought what I would do, without repeating some of what Roger said in the role of the CEO, is a couple of things that are important to me, a couple of things that surprised me, and then something I want to do something about on my own team. And just going down the list of the 10 major headlines. You know, number one, the digital reshapes the roles. This is incredibly important to the talent that I see both in recruiting and in our company. We just have to begin to grow leaders, not just experts. And I would say this about my development efforts, and I'll bring it back to that at the end, is we are growing. We've focused a lot on capabilities. We focused a lot on social media. We focused a lot on digital. And, you know, it occurred to me about a year ago that that was all great, and particularly the young people that I see coming out of the communication schools, and we recruit about 12 to 15 of them a year, is that we really need to invest in them as leaders. And the digital era requires even more of that, because the speed at which we move in communications, which you saw in this study, requires leaders who trust their teammates, the people who work for them, to make decisions on the fly and to put in place strategies that don't necessarily have 4 or 5 checks on them across the organization. So this number one, which is the digital reshaping our roles, really reshapes my view of the kind of leaders we need to grow in our teams. And I think this is true in talking to some of my colleagues in other organizations, because speed is so much more important than it used to be. You don't have the safety net of 4 lawyers looking at what you're going to do or say. and you've got to grow people who have the confidence, the expertise, and are able to trust others and empower them to make decisions. I got to say this, and surprising me, this Kool-Aid thing is really kind of interesting to me. Maybe it's obvious, but it tells me something that maybe we haven't up and down and across our organizations, we haven't listened enough, we haven't taught enough, we haven't helped people understand the function, understand PR and communications, particularly at the top levels of our companies, and not only the value we can contribute to our organizations culturally. You know, I love the page model. I think it's spot on. I think it's the highest value we can deliver to our functions are to drive culture and character, because we have this broad view. But I have to tell you that it also ties back to this digital reshaping our roles, understanding IT better and that kind of thing. I deal with leaders all the time in GE. You know, we're a global company. We've been around a lot. We think we're pretty savvy, who still don't understand the context in which we operate as communicators and PR professionals. And we have to dedicate ourselves more to helping them understand it. They can't be good leaders. They can't make the right decisions about where they invest their money, who they partner with, who they hire, if they don't understand the cultural context into which big companies fit these days. And to me, that was a little bit of a surprise to me, and just that I'm going to sort of rededicate myself to running this little community college inside the company to help our leaders understand the external environment. And then lastly, what is something I want to do something about from a company development standpoint coming out of this study? I mentioned it a little bit. This generational stuff is really, really fascinating, I think. I see it, and I'm lucky enough to have some of our communication schools folks here and in the audience. I find it a real challenge with expertise of some of the folks coming out of the communication schools. And this is not a criticism, it's just an observation on the kinds of skills that they have to come into a company like ours. We run a program called the Communications Leadership Development Program. It's a 2-year rotational program, do 3 8-month stints in different specialty areas, marketing, Marcom, PR, internal. And I'm finding people with really deep technical skills, really deep social, digital skills, but somewhat entitled because of that, somewhat lacking in their writing capabilities, somewhat inflexible in their willingness to take on tasks outside their perceived expertise. And I just think as a profession, but by the way, these folks are terrific. The people we get from Newhouse and Northwestern here, I mean, these folks are so far beyond where I was when I came out of my English degree. If you want to talk about Chaucer, I'm able to do that, but maybe not Tumblr. But these folks need, you know, we need to go back to some of the basics in both global knowledge, business expertise, and most of all, I'm going to sound like a fuddy-duddy now, but maybe I am, writing skills. The ability to be persuasive and compelling and simple is the most important thing that we do in PR. And so I just look at all of those 3 things, you know, what's important to me, what surprised me, and what I think I'll do something about, taking away from this study. And I have to say, there's so much here that I'm just amazed at it, and it is really, really important for corporate practitioners like us to pay attention to this stuff. It's somewhat hard to get through sometimes, Keith, because of I'm not a statistical person, but the way you guys have framed it today is really outstanding. So thanks.
I was struck by one thing that Dr. Berger said earlier today. In this age of information overload, that we need to take more time to reflect and to really absorb the great work that's being done. I think in the Arthur Page Society is an example, the studies that we've talked about inside of the Institute for Public Relations, work that's being done there in so many areas, and now with, obviously with the Planck Center with this work. How do we take advantage in terms of research and theory, and what are the new horizons of research and theory based on this work that we can look to. And with that, I'd like to invite Dr. Linda Hahn to join us.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you, Bruce and Carla and the Planck Center for inviting me. Whenever I talk about research and/or theory, I always start with what is the most important question we need to answer as public relations scholars and practitioners. For me, that question always comes back to how does public relations make an organization more effective? And in doing so, since we are a profession, not a trade, how do we contribute to society and the different ways we can help organizations serve the public interest in its various forms? So in essence, when thinking about any practical issue affecting the field, such as leadership, I start at the end of the cause and effect chain, where public relations is the cause, and we begin by asking ourselves, to what effect? Researchers study the public relations behaviors of individuals, departments, organizations, and societies to understand, explain, predict, and/or control some effect. For me, the most important outcome, of course, is organizational effectiveness. And in the context we've been talking about here today, leadership becomes an important predictor variable that helps us understand how to make public relations and organizations more effective. Let me say first that this study and the predecessors conducted by the researchers are landmark because they embody the important shift from thinking about public relations leadership as dependent upon individual exemplars in the field and the characteristics these luminaries embody. Instead, we are presented with a much more complex and dynamic model that incorporates individual traits and attributes, behaviors, situational factors or contexts, structural dimensions, values, and culture. And of course, this study is the largest to date on leadership and public relations that circles the globe with its sampling and richly taps the perceptions and experiences of so many top executives in public relations, as well as those somewhere else in the leadership chain. Second, another thing that strikes me about the research is that, like all good research, it presents as many questions as it answers. I'll say more about what seem to be important questions that are exciting prospects for future research. But I would also like to talk about some of the key themes and their possible implications. As we've talked about a lot today, it's probably not surprising to any of us that the digital revolution and its implications for public relations leadership emerged as a resonant storyline. Not only has our toolbox expanded, but we need more research and insights from practitioners about how the power differential in public relations has shifted from managing an often top-down model of controlled messaging by organizations to the challenge and opportunity of harnessing bottom-up, user-generated content for organizational objectives and reputation management. Add to that the challenge and opportunity of mobilization of publics and resources via social media for effective branding and issues management. These, of course, are tailor-made opportunities and, again, challenges for leadership from the public relations function. The theme about the importance of soft skills and self-insights for effective leadership bodes well for public relations because those skills, listening, cultural sensitivity, emotional intelligence, the ability to resolve conflicts, and change management capabilities, have always been our profession's strength. This assertion isn't meant to cast public relations as a soft discipline. To do it well is the hardest job of all, or to downplay the importance of the analytical and quantitative side of the field, which I'll talk about next. But the complexity and uncertainty of the situations organizations and societies are dealing with demands that public relations leaders have the kind of qualitative sensitivities and expertise that were heralded in this study. On this point, I've noticed a change in my university's leadership in the 18 years I've been there, and more top positions are being filled by people with a communications, specifically public relations background. People around campus have told me that people in the field excel at this emotional intelligence, this ability to think and plan strategically, and the interpersonal skills needed to bring groups of people together and get things done. Even the president himself isn't shy about saying his job is all public relations. I find the prospects of more research and theory on these aspects of leadership particularly compelling, because when practiced effectively, public relations makes a unique contribution to organizations that I don't see from other functions because of its focus on being the observer of big trends and issues in the environment, thinking and planning before acting, listening more than talking, and finding solutions for bringing people together rather than polarizing. Future research can examine what I call this public relations advantage by further elaboration and testing of the model presented in the research we've been talking about today and its 6 dimensions of excellent leadership: self-dynamics, team collaboration, ethical orientation, relationship building, strategic decision-making capability, and communication knowledge management. However, ultimately, what this research calls the shared vision seems to be the key dependent variable or outcome that needs much more explication and study if we are to understand how public relations leadership contributes to organizational effectiveness and ultimately important social goals. When public relations helps organizations identify this vision and get people to embrace and move forward collaboratively toward the vision, the function's value and contribution to the organization seem optimal. So along the lines of this research, we need to further model the antecedents, or the predictor conditions, the processes, the day-to-day activities and decisions of the public relations function, and the consequences of shared vision. To what effect are in? That, I think, is indeed an exciting research project to envision. Measurement has always been my research passion because it's key to understanding and capturing the value of public relations. Effective measurement provides the potential for leadership in public relations because it supplies us evidence about the links between our efforts and metrics that are ultimately meaningful to organizations, like shared vision and positive relationships with the publics this vision depends upon. Of course, today's media environment gives us new opportunities for measurement, but the challenge remains how to get away from counting outputs, whether that's media impressions, Facebook likes, tweets, in the absence of demonstrating meaningful organizational effects. I've been thinking about the gender findings in the study ever since Bruce sent me the study overview a while back. Obviously, the study's findings are compelling and beg for further research. Gender research, of course, is difficult because we want to illuminate complexities rather than bifurcate and contribute to false dichotomies. Yet the gender differences in the study's findings are striking, and I'm left wondering, what are the important future research questions about gender and leadership? One of the most compelling for me is whether there is a value system that drives people to be attracted to the field and want to be a leader in the field, and of course, are there gender differences related to this value system? I've observed that people in public relations, men and women, tend to share a value system that drives their commitment and is key to their success. They value the field's emphasis on openness, transparency, communication, connections among people, planning, strategy, and proactive and critical analysis of trends. I see evidence of this in what the practitioners in this study identified as their top 3 issues: dealing with the speed and volume of information flow, being prepared to effectively deal with crises that may arise, and managing the digital revolution. Let me go on the record as saying that I'm heartened by the finding that women are particularly optimistic about the field. The participants must have met some of my students, both female and male, who are fearless, committed, and passionate about their ability to use public relations to lead organizations in both the public and private sector, and the world they are inheriting in bold, creative, humane, connected, and sustainable ways. As for the cultural and regional patterns that emerge, the researchers said it best. The patterns are intriguing, but the meaning is elusive. Comparative research about leadership and public relations is obviously an area that needs further research and theoretical development. I've often pondered that one of the difficulties the field has in defining its jurisdiction and legitimizing the function is a dearth of introspective research, which I believe leaves us wondering about our underlying philosophical principles. Comparative introspective research across countries, cultures, and societies is needed even more. We have codes of ethics to make behavioral decisions, but what is our raison d'être, our reason for being? Research on ethics in public relations tends to reveal that practitioners end up applying situational ethics to their individual or some other's definition of the public interest, perhaps as many definitions as there are people. Do principles like the US medical industry's do no harm or the US legal profession's innocent until proven guilty elude us? Because of its focus on advocacy, public relations is inherently controversial, which makes leadership in the function all the more challenging. So what are the philosophical truisms that the field has collectively embraced? And how can public relations leaders and the practice embody these in spirit and in action? Thinking globally, which principles are embraced, tolerated, or rejected by other societies and their practitioners? I suspect the differences among countries found in this leadership research to some extent relate to that country's or that region's unspoken assumptions about why the field does and should exist. Let me close by saying how thrilled I am that this line of research and theory about leadership has taken a giant leap forward through the efforts of the researchers who designed and executed the study, participating professionals who generously gave their time, and of course, Betsy Plank, and all of those at the center who are committed to furthering Betsy's belief that effective public relations practice and leadership are inextricably intertwined. One of the most compelling, yet albeit perplexing realities of social science, because we study dynamic social situations in people rather than inert physical entities, is that the research and theory are never quite done. There is no magic E equals MC squared in our known universe for public relations. But I know you will agree with me that this research effort and the insights shared today have set the field and its understanding of leadership on an exciting trajectory. The research and its findings provide us with the building blocks of a theoretical model that is rich in application to the profession and practitioners around the globe. The key leadership strategies that the researchers define as self-development, with its focus on increasing individual competencies, and systemic development, with its focus on macro-level approaches such as accreditation, education, and strengthening ethics, provide an efficacious formula for us to explore and develop together as educators and practitioners, committed to enhancing the profession and its potential leadership contribution at all levels. Thank you.
Great panel and wonderful comments today, and it leads naturally now into our next section, which is the Q&A. And before I open it up to the floor, I have a question for the panel that I would like to ask. Gary referred to it in his comments when he talked about, the puzzle for us, or the challenge of generational difference today, as we think about as many as 4 generations who may be in the workforce today in companies, and in particular the millennial population as it continues to grow. And I'm curious, from both educators as well as our professionals here on the panel, how important is reverse mentoring? Gary, you and I talked a little bit about this concept today in companies of learning from others who are joining us today. I think our educators see this clearly. As you think about research that we've heard today and the importance of really growing closer to these new communities that join us, how important is that? And how do you see that linked to some of these concepts? Reverse mentoring, again, being learning from the new millennials who may join us. Roger, any thoughts about that? And if you can, I'll ask our sound person to turn on our sound here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'm glad you raised it, because it's very, very clear that we're living in a very different world. Someone mentioned earlier, I can't recall who it was, but on an earlier panel, someone said, no, I think Kathy said it actually just now, that Yes, it was Kathy, yes. Thank you for
Thank you.
helping me remember that. I think it's a great point, and one of the things that we're really focused on at Page is not just the CCO. I mean, that's our mission, but we're very, very well aware of the fact that for the CCO to succeed, the CCO has to have an entire department that works, and so we're very focused on development at the next levels as well, and learning up and down the organization is critically important.
That's great. Kathy, you see the young men and women coming up. How can we learn more from them as we think about these learnings in the research?
I think that's one of the biggest challenges. How can we incorporate their perspective into leadership training and development and help them learn from their perspective? That's the big challenge, of course, of learning, is how do people learn? But I think maybe more important than that is that as we think about leadership in public relations, we need to take an inside-out kind of approach rather than bring in all the leadership information we have about leadership in other fields, and we really need to spend some time thinking about how is public relations different, leadership different than in other fields. I think it is, and I'm not sure that we've fully explored that issue or question.
Yeah. Gary, I know this is a big part of what you do.
Yeah, I would just say for, you know, an old guy like me, it's, you know, quite refreshing. You know, we all have, I think in communications and PR, really new jobs which is great. You know, who wants to have the same job from year to year? And the young people that reverse mentor me, and they do on social media, not only help me understand the tools and the platforms and all of that, but understand, you know, aspirationally a generation, you know, and what's motivating to them. And so it helps us in our marketing and our communications more broadly. And I feel like, as the old guy, I can bring to them some of the soft stuff about leadership and globalization expertise, and then just help them to think through their decision making to make sure it's focused on a strategic and, you know, goal and initiative. So I feel like they give me sort of a breath of fresh air and an insight into a world that I wouldn't get otherwise, and I give them the old fuddy-duddy stuff about you know, globalization. I was a journalist in government for a while, and I can give them that sort of public policy perspective on things as well. It's really fantastic.
Good. Let's open up for questions from our audience. In the back over here, if you can, please. For the panel, and as you have questions for the researchers, we can certainly pose those as well, but let's certainly go with our panel for now. Thank you.
Has anyone looked at how the gap between leaders and perception of their own work and how they're perceived by those younger employees differs from our industry to other industries? Is that a pretty consistent gap across industry, or is this something specific to the public relations industry?
Well, this sounds like this may be a question for the researchers in terms of a comparison of this work and gaps that may exist versus others. Bruce, that work has obviously not been done at this point. Okay. Next question. Over here in the front, Alan Van der Molen.
Thanks. I've got a question for Gary and for Roger. And Gary, you hit on something that was niggling at me a little bit during this related to Kool-Aid. And it seems to me that this is all inside baseball for the Americans research, where we've talked to our own, instead of asking our sponsors on the inside or out what their expectations for leadership out of our function is. I'd be interested in just hearing from current CCO and former CCO kind of what the expectations within your organizations are of the function.
You know, we did this last year in GE. I brought in an outside person to do just this, to interview the senior leaders in the company, including the CEO, and then the leaders in the communications function. So asking the leaders of the company, what do you expect from communications? And the communicators, what do you think you're delivering? And huge gap. You know, just a complete difference. And I think it's reflected in this research, this Kool-Aid stuff. You know, the leaders want trusted advisors. That came away from, you know, they want somebody, again, who can play at their level, who can give them advice on things, at least for the CCO, beyond communications. and just be sort of a voice in their ear on some really tough decision making. Again, soft skills, right? Coaching, listening, etc. And the communicators, at least in our company, we're still focused on the hard skills, delivering good, which are important. And so that was the gap that we saw inside GE.
Roger.
Well, I was very fortunate in my own career. I was actually brought into IBM over 20 years ago into a company that really had an incredibly good communications function, but didn't truly understand the value of it. That's totally transformed now as Gerstner brought in his own guy, and then John succeeded him, and John's clearly one of the senior leaders there. I was very fortunate at Aetna. I worked for 5 CEOs in a very short period of time who all really got it. Particularly the last guy, Jack Rowe, who turned the company around, who asked me to lead the cultural transformation as the CCO, which was bizarre. And now we've got these reports saying that's what the CCO should do, and I actually have some experience doing it. But more broadly, I think, the question is, do all CEOs get it? And I think the answer is no. As part of the Authentic Enterprise study that we put out, well, this research was done at the end of '06 and early '07, we did some CEO research, which we plan to redo coming up here early in 2013 to see how the CEO expectation of the function has changed over this period of time. And we're also, I think, recognizing in light of the comments I made earlier about it's not a guarantee that the CEO either knows what he or she wants from the CCO or is in fact able to get it from the CCO, that we think one of the most important things we can do is enlighten the C-suite. And so Gary and Pam Wickham of Raytheon are co-leading a work stream within Page to aim at the C-suite to bring CEOs and others more in line with the thinking that we're doing. We're talking about bringing together some CEOs to help us in an advisory panel with this.
Thank you. Next question. Back in the back over here.
Is involved with this. I'm curious, when will some of these things be released, either through papers or there will be sort of an executive summary or something that might be available to review? Because as you do look through the next steps and you are seeking feedback, I think it would be helpful to see something beyond some of the detail that was presented here today.
Dr. Berger.
Today to the plankcenter.ua.edu. You'll find the slides, you'll find the text, you'll find a report of the research. We have any number of papers under development right now. We're making engagements and commitments to speak at conferences in the Middle East, in Europe next year as well. We have a book that we're starting to put together, so there's a lot of
Before we field another question from the audience, I want to just field one to Frank and Dr. Hahn. On the measurement front, this 800-pound gorilla, it's often said we live in a world of words and images, and the people that either we report to or work with as clients live in a world of numbers and process. How do we close the gap and build these models so that we can have a more effective way of keeping score in the work that we do? Frank, I'll start with you and then with Linda.
I personally think the number one thing is we have to agree upon what some things are. I mean, we don't even have common definitions for elements that we measure today. What is an impression? What is an opportunity to see? Even what is an article? And depending on what research provider you're working with, you can get different definitions of those. And that's one of the reasons why we're frankly trying to start at a very basic level of saying there needs to be certain standards for how you do this. There will be people who will complain that you're therefore taking away their ability to innovate. My own view is that's nonsense. What it does is it raises the level of innovation to just above the platform of standards, so you need that platform in place.
Like certainly concur with everything Frank has said, and of course the Institute for Public Relations has really been at the vanguard of public relations measurement. Last spring I went to PR News measurement conference in Washington, D.C., and obviously a lot of the panels had to do with measurement of social media. And talk about reverse mentoring, all of the speakers were younger than most everybody in the audience, including me. So I was actually really thrilled with the progress the field has made and some of the exciting things practitioners were doing and their ability to really, again, measure those meaningful effects, moving beyond outputs to meaningful outcomes. And I think one of the challenges of social media, they make it very easy to count things, but as I said earlier, it's not always the most meaningful things. But they also leave lots of footprints, lots of tracks that can be measured and linked to meaningful outcomes. So, I'm very excited about some of the analytics and progress in measurement that we've made as a discipline since I first began. But I certainly agree with Frank that it's an ongoing challenge. It really is. We used to call it the Achilles heel of the field, and I think it's probably safe to say that's still perhaps appropriate. But again, I guess I'm the eternal optimist when I look at the progress we have made.
Good. Other questions from our audience? Please. Over here in the back. Marjorie.
This is such an interesting study from a global point of view, and everybody's commented that that's an unusual aspect, especially some of the countries, I think, where there's been less transparency about these activities. And I just wondered how you were going to, or what the next step is about seeking feedback from those countries, and whether there's any, anybody could be of help in feeding into that process in terms of the actual practitioners and some of the way in which maybe companies see some of the results.
Dr. Berger, just in terms of transparency and communication in those countries in which the research has been done. And
you can come answer my question in person here.
Marjorie, we welcome your help and assistance in any way. We are already talking tentatively about, I had a conversation today with Cheryl about doing some research in Africa. We're going to do some more in the Middle East. As I said too, this is a beginning. This isn't the end. There's a good deal more we would like to do. What we would really like to get from you, either now or in subsequent emails and communication, is some sense of, well, what's important next to be explored? Or what would be of value to you in your organizations or to the profession in terms of leadership research that we do? We have quite a list of questions, actually, we're already considering doing, but we would really welcome feedback from any of you on the business side or the educational side. What's an important next step? We're also always looking for research allies. I outlined 3 this morning that were very important to us in terms of being able to complete the interviews in countries that we wouldn't have otherwise. So we're interested in research allies, whether they're business or agency allies or educational allies. We have some researchers who are interested. This is something I think we can attack collectively. So any support, and especially your ideas for research questions.
Good, thank you. Over here, Ernie Newitz.
Hi, Keith. Good to great session today. Thank you for inviting me. I was disturbed by the leadership numbers. I think everybody was when I saw the survey, and I was really thinking about this because I manage this in my organization. Speed was the other big challenge people face, and I wonder if there's some commonality between pressures of speed and perceived or actual leadership that emerges from the communications department. For instance, speed definitely poses logistical challenges for every team. We're not sourced the way we used to be even 5 years ago. When I joined J&J 9 years ago, I had a staff of 20 people. That doesn't exist anymore. So speed's always a logistical issue, but I think I wonder though if, because I see it in pockets of our own company, we're not reacting like pinballs anymore because we've set up systems to manage management internally that lets them know with confidence that we're on top of the issue and that it's not going to get away from us. So I just wonder if there's some correlations in the research, or if there can be further investigation in this about how leadership manages speed.
Gary, any thoughts about that, just thinking from a corporate standpoint?
You know, I can only give you experiential answer to that, I guess, which is speed creates risk, right? So we know that. And so there are processes you can put in place to mitigate that risk. And, you know, we started a blog during the global financial crisis. You know, our stock before Lehman was $41 a share, and shortly after Lehman it was $6 a share. You know, I'm having flashbacks here, I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to regroup. But we decided, you know, there was a lot of misinformation in the world about, you know, media world about us at the time, and so we started a blog called GE Reports. It was mainly to respond to some of this misinformation that analysts and journalists we thought were conveying about us, and you know, we were very proud of it, and the first posting took us 48 hours to get it up, right? And responding to something in the New York Times. So, you know, that news stream had gone, you know, nobody even remembered. I can remember pushing the button on it, so proud of our new blog, and it didn't make a whit's difference on anything. So, you know, it's an enlightened legal team, it's an enlightened financial team, and building trust in them, ultimately, that you can respond without their stamp of approval on something because you've demonstrated to them that you are a peer in many ways.
Roger, let me build off of that with a question maybe to go to you as well. To build this integrated model that we need today in a global company requires more relationships, to Gary's point, and operating in even a more reduced schedule in some cases. How do we tackle that issue of time when we have the integrated model and think about the need to communicate across geographies and so forth in a timely fashion, but also be reflective on some of the things that we need to do?
I don't know that I have a better answer than Gary's. I mean, I think it does come down to relationships and building the trust among peers. Mm-hmm. And I think it goes to the soft skills that Bruce, I think, appropriately highlighted as being related to the new model and to the ability to work across enterprises in an effective way. I mean, strategic leadership requires an understanding of the business, technical expertise, but most importantly, the ability to build those peer relationships so that there is the trust that you can work together effectively and quickly.
Great. And let me ask Dr. Fitzpatrick a question. In the classroom, as we teach young men and women coming up, a soft skill, like understanding, as Roger and Gary have just spoken about, building relationships is not a part of our curriculum. How do we go about making sure that we do that in a way that kind of can address these issues for the future?
No, I think it is part of the curriculum. I think that you'd find in most every public relations program that relationship management is a huge part of the curriculum, and that's something that's emphasized across the board.
Good. Next question. Dr. Berger, do you have one? Over here, in the back.
So there's a lot of great information about how this could impact C-level executives. What about for young professionals like myself? I know that Gary had some really interesting comments on millennials being entitled, which I appreciated, but what else should we take away from this?
I didn't know there were millennials in the room. I'm sorry about that. You know, I would only say this, you know, lifelong learning. Your journey has just begun, and just dedicate yourself to getting better every day. There's not a course in, you know, sometimes once you get out of school, it's just what you learn on the job day to day, and so you got to be self-aware, something we heard about today, and just committed always to being, I learn every day. You know, I go home every day and understand, you know, think about, I did something well today, I did something not so well, and how can I do it better tomorrow? And that's all I would say to millennials is commit yourself that you're on a journey.
Can I just add a thought to that? I think that's exactly right. In fact, I think it's one of the keys to happiness is lifetime learning. But I would just add one other thought. There was a great slide, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who did what, but there was a great slide earlier about thinking strategically requires taking a broad view. And I just think that it's so important not to think in your silo. Yes, you have to be an expert at what you've been asked to do, but you really need to think broadly about the enterprise and its goals and how it works and the context within which the enterprise lives, which Gary made one of the main points of his remarks from the podium. And if you're, I don't care how low you feel you are in the organization, you think big and broadly.
Next question right here, Kathy Luton.
Could I add something to that?
Go ahead, Frank.
And I want to tie this question back to an earlier one too, which is that the listening and learning from the people who are working for you. I don't know about the rest of you, but my best bosses throughout my career always did that. And I can even tell you what issues, it was the questions they asked, it was the way they listened, you knew that they were learning from you while you learned from them. The problem is, over an entire career, I can tell you about 2 or 3 of those. I think that newer workers today do have and should have a higher expectation for that. Yes, you absolutely, if you're not learning in a job, if you're doing the same thing and learning the same things the second year around, you are truly in the wrong job. It's time to think about your lifelong learning. However, you have every reason to expect that people, if you know something, the people should be learning from you. And if you don't have managers who ask those kinds of questions, who learn from that, clients as well, quite frankly, what are they paying you for if they're not learning from it? So I would suggest that it's not entirely a new thing, but if your expectations are higher now than mine were then, that's a good thing overall.
I want to play back something Roger said and tie it back into the measurement question, which is, Roger, you said get out of your silos. Amen to that. When I hear us talking about measurement, and I'm hoping some of you or in this room will correct me and say, you're reading the wrong stuff, Luton. Do you ever find, by the way, when you're holding one of these mics, you really want to start singing Strangers? I just can't resist it. When we talk measurement, and I am in the healthcare sector, so we measure lots of things that we do with our stakeholders in different ways. I keep hearing us talk in terms of media. We say, well, we've gone beyond clip counting, now let's talk about impressions, and let's talk about articles, and let's talk about, it still sounds so much like we are measuring media relations. And if all we do is measure media relations, then we continue to give the impression that that is all we do. And at least in our work, even with social media, that's the smallest part of what we do. We are truly engaging real people. We are doing thought leadership. Media is a part of it, but it's not the be-all and end-all. And it still bothers me that I hear us defining our measurement of what we really do, all of us do, all day, every day, in terms of fancy ways of counting clips. I mean, to me, it's feeling very much like lipstick on the pig.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just happened to cite that because it was the most readily understandable example that I could give. But you are absolutely right. We need standards for employee communications and the whole process of employee engagement, or what are the standards that you really ought to look at if you're running a good program of that sort. We need a standard for crying out loud, ROI. God help us the way we use that term and it has no meaning. If we understood what the term was and how you really had to measure it, some people could actually do that. Most would give up on it and say, you know what, that's a good standard, I can't meet that, I'm not going to use the term anymore. We need standards for the whole communications process of how you go from awareness to real commitment and real advocacy. So it truly needs to be, I use the term a platform of standards. It needs to be a whole platform.
I want to make just a comment. It's sort of a question, but a comment before we run out of time for the Q&A here, and we can certainly handle a couple more. And it goes to the question of the 800-pound gorilla in the room. The big question in my head about leadership really is, we talked about measurement. How do we measure leadership? How do we measure successful leadership development? We have corporate internal programs. We have the Page Society, which has a great set of leadership development programs. We have on the market Center for Creative Leadership, et cetera. who are selling products and services to develop leadership, how do we know that it works? How do we know that the time people invest in those actually make them better leaders? I was quite struck a couple of years ago at an Arthur Page meeting when Malcolm Goldsmith was there, the coach to executives, and he was talking about the training that he gave top executives, communication people and otherwise, in leadership development. He said, and then I would go back a year later and discover at the end of that first year back on the job, 30% of them hadn't done one thing different than they did before the training. So how do we ever begin to develop a set of metrics that actually will help us determine that people have improved as a leader, other than simply letting them graduate, if you will, from certain skills or courses that we take? So I'm not going to throw that as a question. I think it's a good question. Something I'd love to get some feedback on. Wow.
I took a note, if that helps.
Other questions here?
We'll take one or two more, and then we'll move to the next area.
During the course of the presentation, there's been an occasional reference to understanding the big picture, understanding business. But how much of that is key to people moving up in leadership, is to really have an understanding of business and how it works? And how has that been addressed?
If you don't understand your business, you can't succeed. You know, we're a multi-business company, so our people have to be experts in healthcare, they have to be experts in energy. You know, it does help occasionally to be sort of the dumbest person in the room. I think it's not a joke. I mean, it gets you to ask the basic questions, to simplify things. You know, I can tell you, you know, during the financial crisis, you know, I'm not a financial person, and sort of my lack of understanding to ask a layman's question, I think, was helpful so that we could try to explain our financial products. But this expertise, you know, and this is part of the challenge that we have, is that we have to protect domain expertise in our profession without, at the same time, we're trying to become more generalists, if that makes sense. You know, in my company, I need people around the world who can understand markets and external environments, but might have to go really, really deep with the New York Times on nuclear technology, on how a boiling water reactor works. And so it's that careful balance of having people who can play across the organization, but who in some ways are as smart, or at least as informed, as our engineers about the company. So it's a long answer to say you just can't. If you don't understand how to read a balance sheet, you can't be a communicator in big corporations these days.
Just an interesting story as part of the work we were doing. Mike Fernandez, who I think many of the people here in the room know, told the story. He had a background in politics, but he went back to school and he got a master's in accounting, because he said, I can't see myself succeeding in business unless I really talk that language. Mike Michaels at Toyota was an aerospace engineer before he moved into communications, and said that training really groomed him for the work that he does, building off of that. Why don't we take one more question, and then I want to turn us to the next area. Kevin Sagi.
Okay, Bruce didn't want to put anyone on the spot with his question, but I think I might, because where I work, we want to get away from the evaluation method of, you know, is this person a 4 or a 5 on a scale of 5 at certain tasks? And in leadership development, you know, hearing that you're all 5s or 4 and 5s doesn't necessarily get you there. So I'm curious, how does a vice president of communications or a CCO evaluate their staff and help them know that they are becoming better leaders?
Well, you know, I'll just say quickly, at GE, we have sort of growth traits, leadership traits that everybody in the company, including the CEO, is measured against. And we've developed certain things that we value: imagination and courage, clear thinking. And those things are meant to measure your progress as being, you know, as a leader. And you self-assess, and then you're assessed by your leader, and then you discuss the gap that inevitably occurs. So it's not perfect, but we've agreed collectively that these are the leadership traits that we value and we know are important to the success of the company. And you know what happens is it's not always perfect. You know, we got 44,000 engineers in GE, and so one of the growth values, leadership values, is imagination and courage. So they always, you know, you always have to have a low ranking for yourself, red, yellow, green. And so they make every engineer makes themselves red on imagination and courage because it's easy to do, right? I'm good on clear thinking, I'm good on strategic decision making, all those other things. But you have to challenge those people, particularly engineers, that they have to be good at that too. It's not acceptable to just rate yourself red. So it's, you know, Bruce's question is a really good one about how do you measure leadership. I think you measure it by the quality of the organization that you work for and its ultimate success. We spend $1 billion a year on leadership development, and we're lucky in that sense. But if you don't have a good leadership culture and good leaders, you end up with the things that happen on Wall Street and other things that will tell you you're doing something wrong. When you have people on the op-ed page of the New York Times, you know, saying that the culture is broken, that's a failure of leadership. Goldman's a great company, but I mean, anecdotally, you get those signals. But if you've got a good system and you trust it, I think you'll see progress. I don't know if that's a good answer or not.
I'd like to thank our panel and ask you to join with me in thanking them.